Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, featuring the sharpest minds in marketing, inspirational case histories, and weekly insights you can apply to your business. Find out why top CMOs rank this podcast among their favorites. Now, here's your host, Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
Hello, Renegade Thinkers. My guest today is Sarah Varney, CMO of Twilio. What I think is interesting about this conversation that we're about to have, you never know with a Renegade Thinkers episode where we're going to head. But I think one of the areas that we're going to head is how do you expand your audience? How do you go from a niche where you've been really successful, say to an enterprise customer? This is a really interesting challenge. It's a challenge a lot of our clients face. And I know every business to expand, either you want to penetrate against the existing group or you have to add some other group. You have to make it bigger. So with that, Sarah, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So you, at one point in your career, were an equities trader. I like to think of you as a sort of a Wall Street refugee.
Good description.
Yeah. So you started there and it was like, this isn't for me?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was just telling the story last night on a panel. I was recruited on my college campus by Charles Schwab to work on their equities floor in Jersey City, New Jersey. And they had their big sell weekend and I got on the desk and it was, .com boom. And it was like a casino. I'm like, this is amazing. This is work. This is awesome. Sign me up. But by the time I started, it was, the market was already starting to fall apart. There was not a lot of trading to be had. And don't get me wrong, trading can be an amazing career, amazing hours. It can be super lucrative, but I just, I didn't, see myself doing that for 30 years. And so I decided to do something which I thought was going to be less stressful, which was enterprise software marketing. And look where I am now.
Yeah, look, now, one thing I did notice I have a couple of friends who were Bucknell grads. How does a California girl end up at Bucknell?
It's a good question. I think, again, I think it speaks to my renegade nature. I'm the youngest of 5 kids and all of my siblings had stayed pretty close to home. We are a big Santa Clara University family and my oldest brother had gone to Stanford and my parents were super strict. And I was like, I'm going to show you, I'm going to go to school in the middle of nowhere where, I can be my renegade self. So that's how I ended up at Bucknell. But
hilarious. Now, 1 of 5, that's got to mean life was just easy for you. Your older siblings paid the way. You got away with murder. I have no doubt about that. Am I right?
You would think, but I don't know that I was on my family's agenda. So there was a big space between me and my closest sibling. And I think they forgot in the course of, there's an 8-year difference between me and my closest brother. And, I think that they forgot all the things that he'd done in college. So it's kind of like starting over.
Yeah. And then I think there's the girl thing too that, yeah. So, all right. Well, we're going to fast forward. You spent, almost a decade at Salesforce, which must have been a fascinating period because the company was just growing like crazy. What were some of the key things from a marketing standpoint that you think you took away from that experience?
Yeah, I mean, it was an incredible time to be at Salesforce. When I started at the company, it was about 1,100 people, $400 million in revenue. And now it's, the tallest tower in San Francisco and 35,000 people. It was just really an incredible place to learn and grow. I had, 3 major roles over the course of 10 years there. I started on the App Exchange, which is the Salesforce's cloud ecosystem. It predated the Apple App Store. So it was a great job as a marketer to like basically go after ISVs and, traditional software companies and try to encourage them to build on a platform that was, very early in its making. But that really pushed me as a marketer and helped me really grow and challenge myself.
Salesforce is an interesting brand and because they bought a lot of companies and they do all these different things. But at the end of the day, it's what we call a branded house. It's really one giant brand. I'm imagining that if you were at the app desk or you had one of these other smaller units, that it was kind of hard to sort of say, hey, over here, we do this.
Yeah, it was. And I mean, I think it, in a lot of ways, you were working at a small startup within Salesforce. And I think that really, I liked kind of not being I think that's what really helped me hone my marketing skills. I wasn't on the flagship product to start. I was on the App Exchange, which is our ecosystem, and then I was on a company we acquired that was called desk.com. And so I really had to think creatively about how I could not just get our customers' attention, but how could I get my internal constituents' attention and make sure that we were getting our fair share of, marketing attention and getting the right stage time and all of those things. And, if I had started on the flagship product, which is actually ironically where I ended at Salesforce, I might not have been as scrappy in my thinking and my approach.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point as some of the listeners are sort of managing their career and they think, oh, well, I really should work on a big brand and so forth. I mean, the good news for you is you were within a giant organization, which meant even at when you started, you still had a lot of people that you have the air cover and everybody knows that Salesforce is, but you had the opportunity to be an entrepreneur. And you had to be scrappy. I think that's a great sort of little light bulb there for you marketers thinking about your career, seeing if you can find a unit within a big company to sort of do it. I also like the fact that you mentioned having to fight for resources, because I think a lot of the chief marketing officer's job is about that, whether it's on the grand scale saying, hey, don't hire more salespeople. Let's think about a little bit more marketing. You're always fighting for resources, and you're fighting for share of mind from an employee standpoint in terms of helping them understand the brand and having them inform you. So, okay. Interesting. All right. So you get to Twilio. Just to sort of describe the situation a couple of years ago, what did you find yourself when you got there? Did you have a mandate?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar to Salesforce, I started Twilio at a very similar size in terms of employee count and revenue. And just like we were talking about with my experience on App Exchange, I love coming into an opportunity where the foundation has been poured. I don't need to worry about fundraising and the doors being locked or any of that. Like, the foundation's poured, it's a solid company, but it's not dry by any means. And there's still an opportunity to drive impact and change. And, when I came over to Twilio, I mean, I think what helped me come into this role was that I did have the enterprise experience. And Twilio has traditionally been, prior to about 2 years ago, was largely a self-service operation. It was a very developer-first and developer-centric company. And, over the last couple of years, we have definitely built out our go-to-market motion. And, with that, there's a requirement to make sure that you're not just thinking about the kind of online optimization and all of the growth tactics that you would use online, but how do you build the connectivity between a marketing organization and a sales organization? And how can you build programs where that handoff is super smooth and you're maximizing pipeline?
Yeah, I think we can, we're going to dive into that, but I just one observation. Again, speaking to so many CMOs, one of the things that some struggle with is understanding their personal brand and what they're really good at. And the fact that you sort of see this is you're not a, put the foundation in, it's like take it a little bit and then help it grow exponentially, which I think is great. And by the way, again, as your career develops, to be known as one of my early show guests, Gina McDuffie, nickname was Gina the Builder. And that was what she was really good at. Companies that were kind of in trouble, often they were family brands, and suddenly they were making a transition and they needed to grow up. And she was good at building a marketing expertise in-house. Okay, so.
Well, I'd love to expand on that, because I do think it's interesting. I have found that what your brand is might morph or shift depending on what the company needs are and what their value system is. So, at Salesforce, I was a traditional product marketer. I was doing keynote presentations and I'd help with our roadshow and think about, messaging and positioning. And I would say that that's my lead, as opposed to demand gen and more the online side of the world and programs. And coming here, I'm much more known for my establishment of programs and that kind of connectivity between sales and marketing and more the campaign side of the house. So it's been really interesting for me in this transition to see what kind of how people view my brand and how that's changed over time.
Right. Okay, so before we get into the real meat of this, Did you have some very specific sort of goals where if you were sitting with the CEO or the CFO at the very beginning of your, did they say to you, here's what we want to accomplish, here's what success looks like?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that, and I think some of them are further in the funnel or further up in the funnel and harder to measure. Like, how can we make a bigger market for Twilio? How can we make a name for ourselves in the contact center space? And then, more tactically, how can we drive a certain amount of pipeline to feed our sales team, which is growing at, X% a year? I think that that's pretty standard for any kind of CMO. I would anticipate that's pretty standard for any CMO role where the management team is thinking holistically about how to drive a healthy funnel and business long-term.
Right. They didn't say, increase the pipeline by 70%, they didn't give you specific, it was just grow the market.
No, they absolutely did give me specific targets. It was in correlation with, tied very tightly to how we're growing our sales team and what quotas are. We like to say at Salesforce, I do this sometimes, the old habits die hard. We like to say at Twilio that we are, a 10-year-old company with a 1-year-old sales team, or now a 2-year-old sales team, I would say. And so I think where it was tricky coming into this role was figuring out what are those right ratios between sales source pipeline and marketing source pipeline, and what are the tactics that are going to drive this business. At Salesforce, I had the advantage of having like 15 years of data and knowing exactly, it was very formulaic. And here it's been a little bit more of an art to really figure out what are the right tactics that are going to create a healthy funnel for us.
Perfect. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to dive into making this transition from developer-driven to more of an enterprise sale. So stay with us. Did you know that Renegade Thinkers Unite was ranked number 2 of the top 10 podcasts for CMOs by Crackerjack Marketing? Wow, we're really honored. Now, we couldn't do that without amazing guests, and we've had some amazing CMOs on this show, and also terrific listeners like you all. If you like what we do here, please subscribe on your favorite podcast player. That way, you'll never miss an episode. Also, as a special thanks, I'd like to send you a free ebook on Renegade Thinkers. Now, for that, just email drew@renegade.com. Now let's get back to the show. Okay, we're back. And we've been talking, Sarah Varney and myself have been talking about helping companies transition. And here you are, you arrive. And what's interesting, just so folks, because I've had the CMO of Magento, which was very developer driven. Obviously, they were bought by Adobe. Let's see, I've had Red Hat, also very developer driven, and Acquia, another sort of, these are Red Hat and Acquia being open source companies. And there's a very interesting part of that when you have that, when developer community embraces your brand, they feel like it's theirs. And they own it, and they want to be part of it, and they get very upset with you if you sort of break it somehow. And this goes back, by the way, years ago we worked with IBM when they were targeting the developer community, and so it's the same. It's just larger and bigger, and they're more important. So how did you, as you started to think about going upstream to the enterprise, make sure that you were still taking care of your developer community?
Yeah, I think that the line I always hear is the like cardinal rule of marketing developers is don't market to developers. And coming from the world I came from, that was very opposite. I was used to a traditional funnel. You start with kind of the eBook and thought leadership, go down through more product demos, and then get to pricing pages. And in SaaS, it's a pretty well-established playbook. And so for me, I had to come into it with really having beginner's mind and say, all right, how can we preserve the great culture and the great energy in our developer community while additionally talking to line of business buyers who have a need for Twilio products, but are not necessarily technical and steeped in APIs. And so the way I've approached it is, how can I make the developer's life easier in kind of making a case for using Twilio up the chain? And so, we come at it from 2 angles. We still maintain all of our developer led initiatives in terms of building the best documentation in our space, in terms of having on-site hands-on training, in terms of developing programs like Twilio Quest, which is a really fun, interactive video game style approach to learning Twilio. But then also, how do we get networking events? How do we build content to get the people that are in the decision-making chain for the product or program that they're trying to launch up to speed with Twilio, up to speed on why it's more quality choice in terms of performance and reliability, and get the two groups talking earlier than they might have been previously. And one really interesting tactic that we've seen pay off recently is the concept of an enterprise hackathon. So what we'll do is we'll bring Twilions on site to a big enterprise customer, and we'll facilitate all of the day. We'll bring development teams together. They can hack on Twilio, and at the end of the day, they walk out with 3 to 4 proofs of concept. And the management teams at these companies love it too, because they're giving their employees new skills. They don't have to do anything. We basically show up on site and make it super easy for them. And that's been a great way within the course of a day to really get these two types of roles within an organization on the same page, and excited about Twilio.
Very cool. And now, are these hackathons at existing companies?
Yes, they are. Hackathons at existing companies. Yes.
I meant existing clients, but.
Oh, existing. Oh, yeah, sure. So they are. Yeah, these companies exist. They are, they can be, we do these for people that are in all sorts of stages in their relationship with Twilio. They might be just starting out and, kicking the tires a bit. They might be someone that's been working with us for years and are looking at their next project.
Right.
But I think it's probably most impactful in the companies that have not been doing a ton with Twilio to date, because it really just fast forwards their usage of Twilio and gets them really fired up and excited about the power of what our APIs can do.
So I think it might be helpful for the folks that have been listening 15 minutes in to actually sort of stop for a second and explain what Twilio does. And I'm going to take a stab, and then you're going to correct me, just because I'm going to put it in terms that my father would understand, which is my 93-year-old dad, who was a guest on the show, episode 100. So Dad, what they do is there's little pieces of code called APIs that connect information in communication. So when you hit the Uber or Lyft, let's say you hit the Lyft app, their API manages to connect the cell phone information with your order or something like that. But you're basically connecting communications, right? Getting various systems to talk to each other. Is that a decent explanation?
Yes, no, it's a great explanation. We're a customer engagement platform. We deliver a series of APIs for essentially any way you want to communicate with your customers. SMS is probably our most well-known, but we also deliver APIs for voice and video, even fax. So you name it, we help you communicate. I know, with your customer. Fax is still a very widely used use case, especially in spaces like healthcare. So fax is alive and well. You'd be surprised.
No, I'm not. And people always talk about how these things, sometimes they take a long time to change. I remember years ago, 15, 20 years after the computer, there were still 1 million typewriters being sold because people like to use them for very specific reasons. So I think it's going to be a while before faxes die, but I hope it's sooner than later, because we don't have a fax number or a fax machine, so it's a pain in the ass. But SMS, I just want to, again, let's say you were rented your car for a person who travels a lot on business like myself. I love getting that SMS with that, "Hey, Mr. Nizer, your car is ready at X slot." It's just so great. So
that's 100% a use case that Twilio would support. If you get a confirmation from your hair salon that says, "Are you going to be here at 11 o'clock?" Text Y to confirm. That's normally a Twilio product or Twilio partner behind the scenes. So you're probably using Twilio every day. You might just not realize it.
There you go. All right. So thus an ingredient brand, which is something that I was going to start with. And that's an interesting place to be in the technology world. Certainly Intel has made a very good business out of being an ingredient brand, but you're not alone. There are a lot of other API companies out there. What have you done to sort of help distinguish Twilio from some of your major competition?
I think there's a few things that really make Twilio special. I think that, at our foundation, we have what we call the super network. So we are constantly maintaining relationships with carriers across the globe. So if you are a multinational company that, let's say you're a ride sharing company, I'll just say generically, a ride sharing company that needs to stand up service in a number of different markets, to manage all the routing and the all of the telecom infrastructure behind that is a full-time job. It's a full team's job, and with the Twilio Super Network, we are constantly managing those relationships to make sure our customers have the best routes, that they're able to deliver their messages at a extremely high success rate. And for, an example like a ride sharing business, it's really critical that your message gets there within a certain amount of time. This is a matter of seconds, not minutes that you have to spare to really kind of build loyalty with that brand. So I think, that at our foundation is what we do really well. I'd say secondarily, over time, since we are a leader and pioneer in this space, we've built a lot of logic and intelligence on top of our core APIs, seeing what our customer base is doing and seeing some of the patterns that our customers have developed. We've started to package up some of that know-how ourselves so that people don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, especially for scenarios where it's not going to necessarily differentiate their business at the end of the day. So we want to constantly be thinking about how can we abstract away more complexity for our customers so they can really focus on the elements of their communications experience that are going to be differentiating.
Interesting. So both of those points are sort of very product driven and technology driven. From a brand standpoint, and this is an interesting case for a lot of tech companies lean into their technology, and for good reason. You're the category leader. It sounds like you pioneered some of these things, and that makes it a lot easier so tech people can find you. Where does brand fit in, if at all, in the Twilio story?
I absolutely believe it fits in the Twilio story. If you hear Jeff Lawson, our CEO, talk, one of his kind of mantras is that code is creative. And he loves that the Twilio platform and the way that it's structured attracts people from all different walks of life. We have everyone from a Grammy Award nominated rapper to a magician. We have a Twilio magician, literally. Okay. To all of the traditional developers that you'd expect in an enterprise entity, and I think that Twilio really likes to attract likes to build a platform in a way that it can be useful to all types of organizations, both for-profit and nonprofit. And you really see that in the types of applications that ultimately end up in the hands of end users. And these are some of the most disruptive, products that people are really liking to interact with today. Airbnb, Uber, all of the kind of experience-driven brands that didn't necessarily create a new product. Uber didn't invent the taxi. Airbnb didn't create the concept of hotels or even, temporary rentals. But what they did is create an amazing experience around that. And, largely at the core is communications.
Yep. Got it. Okay. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to dive into this sort of enterprise sales transition. Okay. Stay with us.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neiser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers, interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from. Top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only, at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.
So you were talking a lot about the technology, and now we're going to move into sort of, because all of that is not in your control. right? You're just sort of, you're not writing code and you're not doing the integration, you're not doing the service. So marketing, as you move from developers who find you and share it right there, they have a tendency. And I should ask can the developers download the API kit for free? Is there some kind of easy way for developers to start with the product? I should ask that.
They can, yes, they absolutely can get started with a certain amount of credits, and then as they use more, they'd be pushed into a for pay plan.
Got it. Okay. So now we're trying to get, and you mentioned these enterprise hackathons. What else are you doing from a marketing standpoint to get this enterprise customer, and how did that what did you have to change in order to get those folks into the pipeline, so to speak?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what's largely changed, and I saw this transition and evolution happen at Salesforce too. I think when you start a marketing organization, the marketing team will do a lot. They'll put a lot of online content and just hope it kind of shows up in the lead queue in Salesforce down the road. And I think where you can really optimize and drive the maximum amount of pipeline is if you're coordinated on what those outbound efforts look like. So, if you decide the theme of the month is how to build incredible IVR, the phone tree, that we deliver that on Twilio's platform. It's one of our common use cases. All right, well, I could just do, a series. I could buy a bunch of media. I could go do SEM and Facebook and, use all the kind of traditional online tactics. But what's going to make that even more powerful is if I'm also at the same time training my inside sales reps on that use case, driving a webinar within that month and having them drive registration to it. And then also training our AE organization too, our sales rep organization, so that everyone is kind of singing from the same hymnal that month. And you just get more energy and leverage if you've got your whole sales organization working for you at the same time. And so programs like that have been something that I've been have brought to Twilio over the last 2 years, and I think there's also huge value in driving consistency and repetition with programs like that, making it a monthly cadence and making it just part of the sales religion here and the way that we operate.
So it's interesting, theme of the month. Is that part of your plan? Is that every month you have sort of a content tentpole idea, and that's what everybody is going to be talking about and sharing?
We do. And I mean, that is, I have a bunch of different analogies. Some are better than others. But I think of this kind of organization between sales and marketing as a grocery store. And I think that sales often looks to marketing content when they need it, as opposed to like proactively like I wish in a perfect world they were like hanging on waiting by their inbox, waiting for my monthly update and reading every slide deck and memorizing the pitch. But I know that's not reality. They're often where they're going to use my content is when they're in the middle of a deal and they need to get more detail on that use case and get to it. So I think one of my core jobs is to make sure that, going back to the grocery store analogy, that my grocery store is well organized. And when they have that need, they know exactly what aisle to go down, and they're going to find, pickles in the middle row and, be able to get to the pickles as quickly as possible. But I also think there's value in the mailer that you get every Sunday that says, hey, steaks are, $4 this week or whatever it is. And that's where you can put that. That's where I think the monthly cadence and drumbeat is really important to get sales, new reps, especially established on what the core use cases are and really kind of get to, I always say, like, let's make sure we've got 80% coverage for our core use cases and that sales really understands the main ways they'll be successful. But then also it's an opportunity to get out new products, new releases, new features through that kind of mailer approach. So, that's my way I approach it. I think that there's a mix of push and pull tactics that you've got to use with sales to be effective.
And you really are dependent on them in many ways, because I'm imagine these are long sales cycles and multiple people involved in decisions. And so unlike, there might have been some sales folks think, hey, I got the right person, I'm going to close the sale. It doesn't seem to happen on an enterprise level. I mean, we've had Brent Adamson of Gartner on the show a couple times, and we spend, literally probably spend an hour and a half talking about buying committees, sales cycles, and so forth. So, right, I mean, how long is your sales cycle?
It absolutely depends on what segment we're playing in. And, obviously as you go up market, those sales cycles get longer and longer. And just like you're saying, there's more decision makers and the contract process is more complicated. So it just depends what market we're selling to. And, I think we come at it from different sides. There are some customers where you might sell one use case and expand from there. There are others where you might try and come in with a larger customer engagement vision, and that company is really hungry for it. So I think that's where I'm not a salesperson, but where I've seen salespeople be very successful is understanding where that company is in their life cycle when it comes to communications and figuring out the right approach to make them successful.
Okay. Just thinking about, I had a note here, hang on a second. As you're testing these things, or whether or not you're testing these things, has there been any of these theme tentpole monthly things that have worked better than you expected and ones that didn't work? By the way, you made me hungry with the grocery store analogy, which is why I was thrown off there. But
apologies.
Yes, I was thinking blue paid specials, and I was thinking, I don't know.
Well, there's so much you can do with it. There's
are the avocados right? I don't know. There was a lot of places that I could have gone with the grocery store, but clearly having it fully stocked, I get that metaphor quite nicely. But is there in that mix of aisles that you provided, is there one thing that you went, oh, that really worked a lot better than we expected, and then maybe something that didn't work as well?
Yeah, I mean, my boss is a former marketer himself, and one thing he always says, which I appreciate, is that internally you've got to market your marketing. And I think that I think where I wouldn't necessarily say one thing worked and one thing didn't work, but I would say that you've got to be careful that there's a balance between creating a steady cadence of communication so people know what to expect from your marketing organization without it becoming noise. And so I think you have to create the structure so that, like, when they get that email in their inbox, they know what it is, but you also have to be constantly thinking about how you can get their attention. It's not any different than how we think about marketing externally to our customers. It's just a new internal audience that you have to cater to and think about what you're up against. They're time constrained. They've got multiple deals they're chasing. And, how can you even just cut through the noise internally to make sure that what you're doing is landing? So, there are points, I will say, where we've kind of gotten, I wouldn't say lazy, but we've just kind of been too formulaic in our approach. And we've seen the kind of subscription rate or the viewership drop off. And so those are points where I started to say, all right, let's rethink this email campaign, or, this email cadence, or let's rethink this webinar series that we do for the field to make sure that it's aligned with what they actually need and that they're paying attention.
I watched a presentation that you did on content marketing, and one of the things that you said struck me, which is you have to earn the right for the consumer or the customer or the prospect to consume your materials. How are you guys earning that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I 100% am a believer, still a believer in that statement. I think sometimes what happens, you'll see in enterprise companies, they say, you get really sucked in with the headline. It's like, transform your customer engagement experience, turn the page, and then the page will say, like, buy Twilio, or, like, and you're like, wait a minute, I thought you're going to like tell me how to like change my life. And now I'm just, being told to buy your product. So, I think that you've got to really establish yourself as knowing your category, and that has to be 100% product agnostic for you to build build credibility in the space and really show that you're helping someone. I think that's you got to be your approach when it comes to content marketing. I apologize. I forgot the second part of your the second part of the question.
It's okay.
I got so excited.
Yes, exactly. No, it's okay. Your answer was fine. As we sort of wrap up, I'm curious, as you've made this transition, what do you think, or say, if we have a group of CMOs listening, 2 do's and a don't for them as they sort of move from, say, a specific, a smaller target like developers to enterprise sales, which are far more complicated? What are 2 do's and a don't for those folks?
I think do for sure meet with customers as early as you can in the process. And that's kind of marketing 101. But I think it's easy to, you might get wrapped up in internal meetings, and those are important too, to understand the internal dynamics, but make sure you get in front of customers as soon as you can to understand why or why not your product is currently resonating and how you need to reshape the existing programs or create new ones to map to that. So that's definitely a do. I think also you want to make sure, this is kind of a do and a don't, I guess, because I'm going to say do not do this. So I think you have to be careful when you are looking at your website and thinking about different mechanisms for people to learn, that you're not compromising either your audience too much. I think it's when you try to do all things for all people, you get into a world that's where your messaging is pretty watered down and it doesn't hit with either audience. And that's something you just have to be careful and mindful of. And then I think on the don't side, don't come in assuming that you can just, if you have an enterprise background and you're going to a developer-centric company, don't assume you can just run that enterprise playbook. There are so many dynamics that are different, and you need to be really careful and check yourself not to say oh, well, I know how this works. I, worked at an enterprise software company, and this is the way we need to go. Of course, you want to come in and have an opinion and be definitive and come in guns blazing, but you really need to be mindful of the customer base that got your company to where it is when you walked in, and make sure that everything you're doing, even if you are moving to the enterprise, is still authentic to that core brand.
Perfect. Okay. So as I think about some of the things that I heard today, I can always put it in the CATS framework, which is courageous, artful, thoughtful, and scientific. And the courageous part to me, is that this is a company that started in a unique space, created a unique space. So that's really important as part of that. I love from an artful standpoint, this notion of code is creative is a great sort of phraseology, and the enterprise hackathon as a way of being helpful to a customer and sort of getting your core user excited enough to sort of show that to a broader audience. We talked a little bit about thoughtful in terms of creating content that is of benefit to the customer, but it was interesting. It was also content that was a benefit to the sales team internally, and how you had to really think about that, both in an artful way to remind them, hey, interesting new stuff for you to do, and then thoughtful in terms of just not offering a big promise and then coming back and saying, really, this is just a veiled sales pitch. So I've heard you talk about creating tools and ROI calculators and things like that. All of those are good. The one thing we didn't spend much time on is scientific, although we did talk about your overall goals of growing awareness and and filling the pipeline. And I'm just going to ask, sort of flat out, do you see marketing can you sort of point to a number and say your marketing is driving 30% of pipeline at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously can't publicly share what that contribution is, but absolutely. I mean, that was another piece of the foundation that I believe we've thoroughly established in the last 2 years, where we might have just used to focus on developer signups and really making sure that that number was healthy and growing at a good pace year over year. We are much more regimented in how we manage our, marketing qualified leads, sales qualified leads, pipeline, and then now getting into what does that look like by product? What does that look like by segment? What does that look like by region? And that is for me, that's just table stakes when you're growing a sales organization. You just have to make sure that not only is your pipeline healthy overall, but are you hitting all of the different dimensions of your sales team and building a broader funnel that's healthy across the globe.
And did you have to add any new technology to manage that from a MarTech standpoint, to manage this transition from developers to enterprise?
Yeah, we did. I mean, we're constantly evolving our MarTech stack. I don't know that there's anything like fundamentally, it's not like we added marketing automation net new. I think there's been some tweaking in terms of like how these systems are orchestrated together. But there was a pretty solid foundation already established that I walked into. And, I think that we have added some tools to our MarTech stack as we've wanted to get to a different level of granularity on things like attribution or, account-based marketing. But there was a really solid foundation there in terms of all the typical things you'd think about in terms of website analytics and marketing automation and Salesforce. So
last question, and this is something that I've been working on a little bit as I try to finish my book, is the notion of experimentation. Do you have a percentage of your budget that you assign for sort of testing new approaches?
I wouldn't say we have an official percentage, but I always try to drive the team to make sure that we're not. I always say, like, you need to make sure that you're innovating year over year, not just iterating. And I want you to, I was just having a conversation yesterday about our website, and I said, we were talking about some changes we were thinking about making. I said, these changes will be fine, and I think that they will drive more optimization, but it's not the thing that's gonna, differentiate the brand and push us forward necessarily. So in the day-to-day and the way I manage and the way I try to have my managers manage is, making sure that the team feels safe to take risks and that they can all look back on the year and have 3 to 4 things that, I don't want them to be, 3 to 4 things that they can put on their LinkedIn profile that they'd be excited to share with someone like you on a podcast. And, I think that it kind of takes that daily reminder to make sure that people aren't just kind of being reactive to their inbox and not thinking about how they can land some big programs in the year.
Very cool. Yeah, we spend a fair amount of time thinking about building a culture of experimentation, which is, lots of folks talk about. It's a little harder than you think, because you get distracted by all of the, we got to fill the pipeline and we got to do these things. And so and the reality is, without those experiments, you rarely get any great leaps forward. Anyway, Sarah, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. It was great to chat with you about all these things. It's
all these challenging things in marketing. All right. Well, and to our listeners, thank you as always for sticking with it. Your commute was about 40 minutes today, so hopefully you'll get into work faster tomorrow. Anyway, until next time, keep those renegade thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.